Good morning. One of the side effects of studying this stuff is you notice more about the world. This whole thing about sensory acuity it's a journey. In the sense that you develop more and more of it, and things that you thought you couldn't see become completely obvious, and other people think, well, I was asked to give an account of how it is I happen to be here, and I didn't think that that was the meta program for procedures, that you were interested in what bus or train or whatever I took, or plane. And I was reminded of a story from, it's an ancient tale, and it's told by a trickster character, what would be known in traditional culture, trickster character, or the enlightened fool. In the Middle East, this is the Mullah Nahazruddin. And Nahazruddin is in the evening walking along, and he sees some people on horses beginning to come up. And he says, oh, they might be thieves. You know, I better run and hide. And so he starts to run. And well, meanwhile, the people on horseback go, is that Nasruddin? Is that our friend? Let's go catch up with him. And so they begin to ride towards him. And he looks and he goes, oh my. And he begins to run faster and goes into the forest, and they're coming after him, and he's all scared, and he falls down. And they finally catch up and they go, hi, what are you doing here? And he turns to them and says, just because a question is easy to ask doesn't mean it's easy to answer. And then he says, the answer is, I am here because of you, and you are here because of me. Which is the first recorded example that I have found of systems thinking. Instead of it being a cause-effect, it's a loop, that much celebrated pattern that Gregory Bateson, through his entire career, was trying to get people to appreciate and understand. And that story in my relationship might give a little insight into why it is that I'm here and that you are here. Because, well, you know how some people are a serial monogamist? You know, I was a serial major in college. They finally just made me leave after a while. And among the majors I collected was, and it bears on the story, was one in literature and one in experimental psychology. Sometime I'll tell you about the Vogue pigeons. Because we had these pigeons, and first of all, if you know anything about experimenting with pigeons, training them to do things, is you let them eat as much as they want. All right? And then when you weigh them, and then you starve them to 70% of their weight. So you go in, and they're all like little Vogue models, a little cheeks in. And I was trying to explain to Professor Rilling, who was a student of B.F. Skinner, that if somebody starved me to 70% of my weight, I would peck a little green light, and I didn't really see what this had to do with learning. This is an example of how well I usually got along with my professors. But so there was literature, and there's experimental psychology, history of ideas, oh yes, and linguistics. And so after I left university, or was rather invited to, so I was like, okay, you have enough majors, go get an advanced degree. So instead I went into the antique business. And I'm very good at not only refinishing antiques, but repairing rare antique wood thing. Wood was my area of expertise. And so I'm doing that, and my friend at the time, she comes home one day, and she has a book with her called The Structure of Magic, Book 1. And the guy on the cover, you know, with the magician and all this. And I open it up, and I go, oh, generative transformational grammar. Now, I had known about generative transformational grammar from studying linguistics in college, and not only that, I'd been involved in what at that time was known as a help center. I don't know, or crisis center, as if we don't need those now. So there's a crisis center, and we had worked out a series of questions to ask people, and the guy that designed it, I was the internal facilitator, the other guy was the external facilitator, and we brought in psychologists, and we'd find out what they did, and we assembled from that a list of questions. And if you could get through the questions, 70% of the time you wouldn't have a problem by the time you got through the list of questions. He was an engineer. He actually went and did statistics on this and such. And so we got funding from the government for several years, and then as things go on, you move to different cities, your life goes on. So I'm here with this book, and I'm going, oh, generative transformational grammar. Huh, okay. So I'm doing my antique thing. I'm leaving the shop in the afternoon. There was a used bookstore nearby, and I stopped by, and there on the shelf is this other book, Frogs into Princes. Well, now I know these guys, their MO, which is that, their modus operandi, right, is that the cover is something very whimsical. Again, a little magician, and colors and swirls, and it's called Frogs into Princes. Very cute. You open it up, and it's the most serious modern linguistics of the time. So I open up Frogs into Princes. I'm standing there in the store, I'm looking at it, and I bet I read a third of the book saying again and again to myself, my God, they got it. Because I knew from my previous education in the experimental psychology, excuse me, and in linguistics, history of ideas, that if you could change how somebody represented something, how they thought about it, if you could find that linguistic connection, you could change anything. And within 6 months, I was in training. And I was out of these other jobs and things that I had done. Because here, instead of finding something that was amusing, I was amusing myself with these various things. Excuse me. I was amusing myself with these various things. I had this idea I was going to write the great American novel or something like that. And working the antique place and so forth. And here was what I'd been looking for. Now, my interest in that was immediately was to go and to contact Grinder, and it was like, I want to be a modeler. Yeah, I know you do this training stuff, I know the other things, but I want to be a modeler. Because I understood that if you could take apart, you could actually understand how it is that someone parents really well. You could understand how people put together a worthwhile life. That all sorts of things that we left to sort of the randomness and vicissitudes of you happen to meet somebody and they said something at a certain moment and it changed your life. That instead of those being accidents that some of us get and some of us don't, it could actually begin to track it, create it, and moreover, as I began to read Bateson, the idea is you could create new possibilities that so far had only been rare flowers. We celebrate Leonardo da Vinci so much. Do you realize Leonardo, besides a few royal connections, was in the boondocks? He designed all that stuff and created all that stuff and wrote all that stuff, and it wasn't seen for 300 years. Basically, I mean, a few people saw it. It wasn't, imagine if that had connected with the world at that time. Did you know Copernicus, the guy who worked out the shift from the Earth being at the center of the universe to the sun being at the center, he worked it out as a young man. He was so afraid to publish that he waited until the end of his life. He says, okay, I'm going. And then he sent it to the Pope. He wrapped it up with a letter, in Latin, of course, that basically said, Dear Pope, sorry I ruined your universe. But I think that you'll find that this one is much more full of mystery and magic and possibility than the one that we previously lived in. And that was what that moment was for me, was when I realized that you could take this material that I've been studying, whether it was the history of ideas or linguistics or how literature affects people, and you could begin to qualify it and quantify it and begin to understand how it works. The work of Milton Erickson, who did it again completely on his own, and to be able to do something with that in the world, with education. My God, what is that about? The memorization of facts? One of my colleagues, John McWhirter, is a trainer in Scotland. He talks about these. He says, when I was a kid, they taught me the one kind of chemistry. And, I was a good science student, studied that. He says, and then I got to high school, and they taught me another kind of chemistry. He said, and then I got to college, and they said, forget about that. And they started to teach quantum chemistry. And he went, wait a minute. Why don't you guys decide what it is? Now, in his case, of course, he began to put together that was a series of models, a series of approximations at making sense of the world called the chemicals, substances of our world. But how many other people, when they have an idea overturned, go, well, that's wrong? Instead of realizing that what we're doing is a series of approximations to make a better and better, more useful model of how to recreate our experience. That's what I'm here for, and that's what I'd like to light up in you. Yes, you've learned techniques for transforming yourself and other people's lives. I'm very much in favor of that. The world can use a whole lot of that. And you've also been learning how it is that you can put your experience together differently and maximize and increase your satisfactions and possibilities. This is great as well. And I want you to know, and you pretty much figured out, I have no interest in that. I have interest in somebody does something at the next table, and I go, how did they know to say that? Somebody is able to do something really easily, and somebody else struggles with it, and I go, what's the difference that makes the difference? All around you, as I say, at the next table, in the seat next to you, even in another part of your own mind, are these skills and possibilities that we have the tools, we have the perceptions and the skills to find, to propagate, to improve upon. We're only at the beginning of this stuff. That's one of the things that concerns me about the pyramid of the practitioner and the master practitioner and the trainer. It's like it's the best model of the 12th century. You know, it's you get to the top and you're done. Years ago, Bandler said to me, no, it's the other way around. He says, practitioner gets you started, begins to open the world of possibilities for you. And the master, just when you think, well, yeah, I got it, he says, no, there's even more. And the whole idea is it's a launch into the world as a different place. The world as a place full of patterns and possibilities. So, got to practice. So then I was invited to, what I'd done is, and this is something I want to take a moment with, is that through my training, I had modeling projects. Now at that time, you didn't actually have modeling projects as part of the program. Like in the Masters, they have modeling as part of the program. At that time, I modeled accelerated learning in my practitioner. I would find people that are really good at languages, people who are really good at learning things, and that there's something really complicated, and they would not treat it as complicated, but they would get the complication. You understand? They weren't oversimplifying, but they had a way of approaching things. And so I was modeling that, and then I got invited to do lectures. So I was doing lectures around the country, and at the Columbia University Teachers College down that's in New York, and then also I'm thinking of the one in Florida. And I was in Florida, and I'd been down there, and they didn't know what to do with me after my lecture. And they're going, I'm walking around, there's a sign that says, study in Japan. And I went, and they said, would you like to go? This is to please me. I went, yeah. So a month later, I'm in Japan. And I'd always been fascinated by Asian culture, but I made no preparations to go there because I was going to go and learn about the Japanese from actual modeling if I could. So I'm there. There's a school that I'm assigned to at first that goes for a few weeks, and then I met a guy at one of these conferences who said, hey, if you're ever in Japan, look me up. Be careful if you invite me somewhere. So I said, hey, I'm here. And so what am I doing? I'm walking like them, Japanese. But first of all, go back to the idea of the language learning from the other day, is I picked a model, a lovely man, Kuramuchi-san, and willing to step into him, willing to move like him, and could, even though smaller man. And so doing that, and then during the day, when he was at work and stuff, I would watch kids doing stuff, and then, or somebody would be at a kiosk where you'd buy something, and I'd watch that go on, and I'd run that movie, and then I'd step into that movie, and I'd step in, and I'd walk up, and I'd say the same nonsense, and put some money on the counter, and I'd get stuff. I bought all sorts of stuff I didn't need. But it was through these kinds of things, of just being willing to do this, and just moving with it, and not really understanding a whole lot. And I'm thinking, I'm not getting it, because your moments, I'm in the state, right, but then I'm out of the state going, I don't know if this is working or not. And I remember I'm in Fuji Yoshida, which is right next to Yogi Kon, where the Olympics in '64 were. It's where I'm living. I've got a little 6-mat room. And I'm walking in the evening, I'm walking back, and it's like this coming at me. I can see, literally, it's shimmering. Coming at me is this wall that's coloring things as it passes through it. It's a sci-fi movie, And I'm here, and then it goes whoosh, and I'm suddenly in Japanese. And I just kept practicing, and whoosh, and suddenly the world is different. And I suddenly understand all these things I didn't understand before. And I find I cannot explain them to people in English. And I go, that's what I'm doing this for, those kinds of experiences.